Hi, everybody. Today is Friday, May 9th, 2025, and our friends Colonel Wilkerson and Larry Johnson are back with us. Welcome back.
Glad to be here.
Let's get started. Colonel, we talk about what has happened between the United States and Yemen. And in the early moments of what Donald Trump put out about the conflict with Yemen. And right now, to your understanding, what has happened that Donald Trump has decided to withdraw or make some sort of deal between the United States and Yemen?
I can only surmise. I have a few facts, but I can only really surmise. And I think it's a double or triple pronged affair with Donald, if I can attribute any kind of reason and purpose to him. One is he wanted to stick his finger yet again, and he's doing it right now, this moment, as he wings his way, I guess, towards the Middle East, in Bibi's eyes. So he divorced the United States from the Yemen conflict, even though the Al Ansar might not have had anything to do with it. He just said, we quit, we're not going to do it anymore. Second reason, I think, is because the Pentagon was telling him it was grossly expensive. And in two ways, it was expensive in terms of expending those items that we might need, really, in a war. Very expensive items. We were losing drones. We were losing F-18s. No, I've told many people we lost aircraft off of Vietnam quite frequently. It's not uncommon to do that sort of thing when you're in heavy carrier operations, especially multi-battle group operations. So it's not something that doesn't happen. People just don't realize that, being in the military is dangerous. At the same time, that's very expensive. And the drones add to that expense, $30 million a pop. And the military was probably telling him some of the things that we've discussed here, that, confining a carrier or a carrier and its escorts in such a narrow water is not a really good thing to do. You're really looking at possible real problems in the future. And another reason is because I think the assessment of the Pentagon was essentially that if you want to put it in these stark terms, we were losing.
And Larry, before commenting on what has happened, here is what Donald Trump mentioned about it.
Some very good news last night. The Houthis have announced that they are not, or they've announced to us at least, that they don't want to fight anymore. They just don't want to fight. And we will honor that. And we will stop the bombings. And they have capitulated. But more importantly, we will take their word. They say they will not be blowing up ships anymore. And that's what the purpose of what.
Yeah.
Love that term, capitulated.
Yeah.
I can see the head of Al looking in his English dictionary.
This is, this is sort of Donald Trump's equivalent of Gerald Ford going on television saying, "Hey, you got a phone call from those North Vietnamese last night. They've capitulated, so we're leaving Saigon. Everybody run for the helicopters."
Yeah.
This was Trump's equivalent of April 30th, 1975 in Saigon. Look, Trump, the Saudis made it clear that Trump needed to stop this. Number one, that was also a role. And the fact that the Omanis got into the middle of it, brokering it, suggested to me that this was actually broader than just stopping the bombing of the Houthis. That maybe they're going to come to a deal with Iran. Trump would be, it'd be to his credit if he goes through with it. But as Colonel Wilkerson noted, this was just in terms of aircraft loss between Predator drones and the F-18s, you're looking at about $1 billion right there. And then they flew over 1,000 sorties. Well, God knows how much each one of those cost in terms of ordnance that was dropped, plus the maintenance on the aircraft. And many of us predicted this at the outset. It's like trying to punch a bag of Jello. The Houthis aren't going to be defeated with conventional means, and the United States, it exposed the limits of U.S. military power. So you know, Trump, he's putting that lipstick on a pig, putting a blonde wig on it, and calling it Marilyn Monroe. But you know what? It was still the U.S. withdrawn.
And you know what Larry said there about demonstrating the limits of U.S. military power is such a potent statement. Look at what Afghanistan did. Look at what Iraq did. Look at what all of our excursions, basically since the first Gulf War, or that little, no-knock drug bust in Panama called Just Cause. We haven't had a success in 2-3 decades. And it's all because, not all, but it's a large part because we take on things that military power is not appropriate for.
Yeah, very, very true.
What's going on, Larry, in the Trump administration? It seems that he feels that Netanyahu is manipulating his administration in the favor of Israel. That's why
you think?
Yeah.
What was your first clue?
Look at now. It's important that he perceives that.
Up in the New York Times this morning, even a blind pig will find an occasional acorn. Tom found an acorn.
So I like to say, even Helen Keller could see this one. Yeah.
That's unkind to Helen.
I know. Good Lord. This is, it's if true. I always put if true, because sometimes I get my hopes mixed up with reality. But if this is true, it's a good sign that, Trump there's only enough room for Donald Trump in the room, and he can't have another pretender to take center stage. And so, I hope the BB has overstepped, and that Trump has finally said, "Look, we're not going to tie ourselves to him." This, it goes along with the explanation that was given for getting rid of Mike Waltz. Demoting him to the United Nations of all places. So, I welcome it.
Colonel, I would wonder what has happened between the Trump administration and the Israeli one and the Netanyahu administration in terms of the decision on the part of the United States to find some sort of common ground with Houthis, or maybe a peace or some sort of deal between the two parties. Here is what the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, we know how pro-Israel he is, and he said that we don't need Israel's permission to conclude an agreement with the Houthis. And if one of the 700,000 American citizens inside Israel is hurt by a Houthi attack, then we'll respond. Otherwise, we have nothing to do with it. What does that mean for you, Colonel?
Well, this is growing into a realization by a lot of people, even in this circus administration, that we're not gaining any points whatsoever on the face of the earth with this business in Gaza. In fact, we're losing many. And one of the things I think brought it home to the Pentagon, for example, was what he actually did with the Knesset, with full approval, apparently, and then post-Knesset, the cabinet again, full approval, he's calling it a sustained military operation. Well, what that means is essentially CPA Iraq in Gaza. What it means is what Sharon evacuated Gaza for in 2005, shut down 21 settlements and evacuated every single IDF person, because he knew if he stayed, there'd be an insurgency that would bleed the IDF interminably. Yeah. That's what he's asking for now. Netanyahu is asking for that. And oh, by the way, the Gaza terrain, which wasn't all that conducive to such an insurgency then, is maximally so now. There are 250, 500-pound bombs buried all over the place that are inert, didn't go off, duds, in other words. They make IEDs out of them. They used one the other day and blew a Makava tank off the face of the earth. That's what's going to happen to the IDF, and it's already hurting badly. Its PTSD count is now over 10,000. It's got 7,500 additional that are on the margin of PTSD. Lots of reservists are not answering the call. The problems are just manifest throughout the ranks, and he's taking on he hasn't honored a single day of the ceasefire with Lebanon. He's bombing the hell out of it again. He's bombing in Syria. He's protecting the Druze. He's doing all these things that are overextending him, but this sustained military operation in Gaza is going to finish him, And I'll be amazed if we let him start it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Darren.
Yeah, no, the situation with Israel, they didn't learn the lessons of Stalingrad. You know, what made the Battle of Stalingrad so difficult for the Germans was they went in and they bombed, they leveled the whole city, and they created all this rubble. And so actually the tanks couldn't really maneuver through the streets. So they were forced to fight on foot. And all of that rubble creates places for what's called cover and concealment, where soldiers who are fighting and can hide, or they can ambush, and it turned into a bloody mess. There's another parallel as well with World War II. The Wehrmacht, when they went into Poland and into Ukraine, and they were killing civilians, that the regular army was the commanders were writing back to higher command, said, "Look, this is destroying. We're getting some real psychological problems because people, normal people with a conscience, don't break down when they're killing women and children." And what this is showing in Israel is that they're not all monsters. That there are many that are in these reservists that they themselves have children, and when they're seeing these bodies starting to stack up and pile up, it's causing real emotional distress. So, Netanyahu's the entire objective in all of this has been to try to save his own ass from legal jeopardy, and in doing so, he's literally he's destroyed Israel's reputation, making Israel a pariah now among many nations, and it's growing, not diminishing, and and now he's managed to alienate Donald Trump. I mean, I can't, I shouldn't laugh, but I think it's hilarious that, Trump wants to be liked. That's sort of what his weakness. He wants to be liked. And he's, I think, come to the realization that hanging out with Bibi makes him unlikable, and he doesn't like that.
D'accord.
Carl, if you were to assess the situation of IDF and Israeli army today compared to what it was before October 7th, how do you see the way that they are right now, the situation they're in right now?
In very bad shape. Very bad shape. Let's face it. One, they were not designed to be this kind of military. They were designed to be by the original sort of creators. Moshe Dayan comes to mind. They were designed, Sharon comes to mind. They were designed to be a blitzkrieg military, a military that just struck, won, and departed. And there, take that. Deterrence is reestablished. Do it again, and I'll hit you again, like an Operation Cast Lead, which was a precursor for what's happening right now, because they went out and killed everything that moved, men, women, children, everything else, and then said after a few weeks of operation, now, you see what we can do? And we'll do it to anybody who challenges us. So take that lesson. And it was taken for a while. This, of course, was reestablishing deterrence after they had their butts kicked by Hezbollah back in, 2006. Yeah. So that's the way they operate. And the second thing that's playing on them right now is they haven't had a real conflict since 1973. And so they've been doing police duty. And they've become, in many cases, at checkpoints and other places, kind of draconian in that police duty and not very respective of human life. So that degraded them somewhat. Now they're in a situation, as I said, if they go ahead with this sustained military presence, where they're going to get defeated. And that's unusual to the max for the Israeli IDF. And morale and such, I'm told, is plummeting accordingly, especially amongst the reservists, not so much amongst the professionals. But then you think about PTSD like this for a moment. And we had this problem in Iraq big time, especially around Fallujah and Al Anbar province in particular. When you take people off the battlefield for TBI, PTSD, or whatever, PTSD in particular, you're taking those people off the battlefield who have a conscience. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gotten post-traumatic stress, what we used to call battle fatigue. What you're leaving are your killers, your murderers. That's what you're leaving on the battlefields. And that's what phenomenon is affecting Israel right now, too. That's why you get things like a buried ambulance and everybody killed in the ambulance. This is not good for a professional military. And you want those killers, if you're in a big war, you want them, because as S.L.A. Marshall said after World War II, 1 out of every 11 infantrymen really killed 90% of the enemy because they were killers and they did well at it. And the others kind of protected them. And that's the way the military works. Well, now you've got out there for Israel a lot of these killers and murderers. And that's just a recipe for more disaster for Israel. Their reputation is in tatters throughout the world, in tatters. They have no reputation other than brutality, murder, and genocide.
Larry, when Donald Trump has decided to go to the Red Sea to fight the Yemenis, I was thinking, what's the logic behind it? And right now, he's somehow leaving the Red Sea without achieving anything. Do you see the possibility that he's going to get back again, or you see a deal done? You see something that Donald Trump would never repeat it again?
Oh, no, I can't rule out that they certainly could do it again, but, they didn't understand. Number one, they hadn't paid attention to what happened under the Biden administration with their start of Operation Prosperity Guardian. That they assumed that, but the Biden folks really weren't trying, that they were just only doing pro forma attacks, and by God, we're going to show them. It really shows sort of a failure to understand both U.S. capabilities and the nature of trying to dismantle what was going on in Yemen with the Houthis. And I attribute this to having just too many civilians that have had no experience working with trying to target mobile systems. We didn't take down a single Scud during the first Gulf War. Despite we're going to go get them, and there's this assumption about our intelligence capabilities that we were able to have, like the eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings, can see everything and know where it's located, and that's not how it works. And particularly if you're trying to track anything that's out in the open sea, track ships like that, it's very difficult. And when you're trying to track missiles that are on land, that are in mobile launchers, there is not instantaneous. The closest we come to instantaneous communication.
Yeah, it seems that we've lost.
Which shot down? Why they shot down so many? They were shooting down one a week. Prior to that, they'd been shooting down like one a month. So, it was, they figured out, okay, yeah, we see that predator, we're going to take it out. So Trump's failure to understand the military dimensions of this, because he may understand how to build a hotel or a casino, but he doesn't know really a damn thing about this. And I don't think he's learned anything from it.
And Neiman, let me just say that I agree with what Larry just said. And let me add this particular aspect of my own experience. and I think I've read of much more experience in this regard, the blue suiters think that bombs will solve every problem.
Yeah.
They think that all you got to do is take off a carrier or take off out of Whiteman Air Force Base or out of Udeed or wherever and drop bombs on people. And the more you drop, the more success you're going to create. And the more success you create, the more bombs you're going to drop. That's their philosophy. They have been proven wrong since their original disciples laid this crap out. And yet we don't pay any attention to it. We still listen to them. Yeah. I had a 3-star Air Force general in the Pentagon tell me when I questioned him about his 80% of the targets in North Korea would be destroyed in the first hours by the Air Force on the peninsula and the Air Force reinforcing from the United States. And I challenged him. I said, why are you saying that? These howitzers are in caves. They roll out, they shoot, and they go back into the cave. Well, we know where every one of them is. And you're going to pinpoint every one of them. How many are there, General? And, we just got into an argument. And colonels don't get into argument with 3 stars. They get kicked out of the Pentagon when they do. And I was subsequently kicked out. But it's absurd to say that you're going to get 84% of the cannons the North Koreans are going to shoot at Seoul in the first 30 hours.
Yeah.
Larry, part of the war, the conflict with Yemen is this psychological war. And you put yourself in the shoes of your enemy to understand where they stand, what do they think about you. And when you look at Yemen, earlier today I talked with Pepe Escobar. He recently was in Yemen, and he said these people, you have to be there to understand their sort of objectives. They don't care about the United States bombing their only airport just to destroy everything. They're going to fight back. And it doesn't seem this sort of understanding can be achieved on the part of the Trump administration or whoever making the decision in the United States.
That's one of our biggest failures as a country, that we are incapable. We're not incapable, but we rarely take time to understand both the culture, the mentality, the point of view of those that we perceive as either enemies or someone we need to attack. Look, I saw this right after 9/11 because back at the time I was directly involved with JSOC and SOCOM. Scripting exercises, called 0300, 0400 exercises. And so here you're dealing with the most elite forces in the U.S. military. We're not just talking Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. You got the folks out of Belvoir. You've got a bunch of covered air, I'm talking the very, very pointy end of the spear.
Got the guys who did Nord Stream.
Yeah. And the ignorance about they didn't know Sunni from Shia. They had no, as far as just a Muslim, and that's who we're going to kill, without and no appreciation for whatever our role had been in helping create this situation. No memory going back to what we did with training up terrorist groups in Pakistan that were used against the then Soviets in Afghanistan. Zero understanding. So all I'm saying is, what you're seeing now with Yemen, it's consistent. One of my friends and mentors, Pat Lang, he had been defense attaché in Yemen. He understood it. He had been, he knew the culture. But when
it seems that
come talk. Yeah, there we go. Come talk to me. I had this experience with Jerry Bremer because I was friends with Bremer before. That friendship became broken over the whole mess in Iraq. But I had literally had lunch with him 2 days before he was asked to take on the job of being the poobah in Iraq. And so I called him up because I knew he didn't. I said, "Hey, Jerry," I said, I started off. I said, boy, who did you piss off? And he goes, well, when the president calls, you got to say yes. I said, okay. I said, let me help you out. Let me introduce you to Pat Lang. Because I gave him Pat's resume. Pat set up the Arabic program at West Point. Pat was defense attaché to Saudi Arabia and Yemen. But most importantly, he had been the one that hand-carried intelligence to the government of Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War. And he was the head of the Middle East division at the Defense Intelligence Agency. And Jerry goes, no, I don't need to talk to him.
That's Jerry.
How did that work out, Jerry? Yeah. So
he wouldn't talk to Sergio either.
Yeah.
De Mayo. It was absurd. Sergio had to move out there where he later died.
Yeah. Colonel, the other dimension of the conflict in the Middle East is what's going on between Iran and the United States.
Let me just say one other thing that
Go ahead.
I just poured into my head as he was saying that. The Houthis, Al-Ansar, are a different sect than most of Yemen. And they don't like the fact that most of Yemen, which cares, and I suspect most of them don't care, but those who do care, say the mullahs and others, are oppressing them all the time. So I don't know that the Houthis actually worry about Sana'a being hit or any other target that takes out mostly other people in Yemen than they.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because they're different sects.
Yeah. And getting to the conflict, Colonel, between the United States and Iran, here is what Tulsi Gabbard said about who's pushing for war and who's pushing for some sort of negotiations with Iran.
Those who are co-opted by the military-industrial complex, abusing their position to feed or manipulate intelligence, as we saw with the Iraq War, to start a new war. This intelligence community, the work that gets done in places like this every single day, has that power to be the fodder, the fuel, the seed that can lead to yet another unnecessary war. The New York Times article was a result of an unfortunate, unauthorized, and illegal leak of a very private conversation between the president and his advisors. I won't get into the details, but it was a very robust discussion that really speaks to President Trump's care and thoughtfulness as he makes his decisions around these very serious issues of war and peace. Ultimately, what we are doing is providing the president with the facts, the intelligence. Here is what the intelligence is telling us. As the Secretary of Defense, here are the options that are on the table and the likely outcomes that could occur if you go with course of action A, B, or C. And ultimately, it's the president who makes the decision. And he has made it clear time and time again that his goal with Iran, first of all, they cannot be in a position where they can develop or have a nuclear weapon, and that he believes and is confident in the opportunity that this moment provides to be able to achieve that outcome through peaceful means, through diplomacy and through negotiations. And he knows that that's what's in the best interest for the American people and for the world.
Coral, your take.
I couldn't have said it better. I mean, I couldn't believe she started with the military-industrial complex and the vicissitudes thereof, but she's telling the truth, and she's telling the truth basically about the other aspects of it. I don't know about Donald Trump. I'm not in his head, but that's the way the system is supposed to work. The president's supposed to be presented with the intelligence without any bias whatsoever, just the intelligence. It can be interpreted. It must be interpreted by professionals, not by vice presidents, for example, like Cheney did in the run-up to the Iraq War, by professionals. And they will usually say, I have a 90% surety on this, or an 85% surety on this, or this source is very reliable, or this source is brand new and not reliable. So you get the intelligence, and then you make the decisions based on the courses of action that if it's military, the Secretary of Defense gives you, along with the chairman, in terms of courses that you can pursue. And Trump then says, as she was intimating, I don't want to pursue any of those. I want to pursue diplomacy. You keep those in the drawer until I'm ready to use them if diplomacy fails. But I'm going to try diplomacy first. That's a smart move as far as I'm concerned. If that's what he's done, I applaud it.
Larry.
Well, there's I don't know if you noticed, it was a day yesterday, 2 days ago, the news was filled with, oh, we got this imagery of this secret nuclear plant in Iran that's just been discovered. It's been there for 10 years. And it was provided by this Iranian opposition group, who I guarantee is being paid for by the CIA. So what this tells me is the reason they're putting that out now is that I think there actually is some serious movements by Trump to negotiate a deal with Iran, that will not require Iran to give up all of its missiles and drones and to dismantle and disarm, but will put an end, a definitive end, to any suspicion that they're building a nuke. Iran wants that if they can get back to some sort of normal economic activity, because Iran's not the one that's been rampaging around the region, invading other countries.
There you go.
Because we go back to the start of the Iran-Iraq war, that was with U.S. encouragement to invade Iran. We put Saddam up to that basically, and so. They do want peace, and it's again, it gets back to whenever you look at some of the news and the information comes out, you always got to start peeling back the layers, because it's never quite what it seems. Because I've had some friends, oh, look at this is proof that Iran's building a nuke, and I had to go back and say, just look at the source of the information for starters, and right away that it's in the male bovine excrement category.
One other thing, Nima, I would say, after agreeing with everything Larry said, I got the inclination there to believe, and I've gotten it in other places too, I've been disabused of it in other places too, that she really wants to do something about the very insidiousness of aspects of the CIA and other elements within the intelligence community too. And she hadn't figured out exactly what to do yet and exactly how to go about it. But I would say one of the most insidious things I saw in my time in government was how we were using, through the CIA, the idea of liberal democracy to establish in country after country after country color revolutions, or the equivalent thereof, that were not in the interest of that country, its regional partners, or in many cases us. And yet we went ahead and did it.
Larry, how do you feel about the concept that Colonel put out? She tries to do something, but she's not 100% sure where should she start with.
Well, she's dealing with number one, a huge bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And she hasn't had she didn't grow up in it. She hasn't had to deal with it from inside. And I was fortunate, early on getting, when I started at CIA, I got put into what was called the career trainee program. Previously to my joining, that program was restricted only for case officers, people who were going to be going overseas to recruit foreign spies. But Bob Gates, one of the few things he did to his credit that I agreed with was he opened this program to the analysts, to the people who were in science and technology and who were in the admin branch. And what we got in that 1 year was a full exposure to all aspects of that intelligence community or within the CIA. And then in my next jobs at State, where I worked with FBI and with other elements of the intelligence community, and then when I got into doing the military exercises with JSOC, I was dealing with the whole panoply. All 17. They keep counting. They keep hearing now it's 18 intelligence agencies supposedly. It was 17, but I was able to acquire experience over that course, seeing sort of how the whole sausage is being made. And that included, I was read into a lot of SAPs that are not, that go beyond the top secret program. Well, she didn't have that background, and it's easy to come in and just, get the mushroom treatment. They can, cover you with manure and keep you in the dark, and you don't necessarily know that that's what's happening to you. So she's learning, and I hope she starts to hold these people accountable, because there've been lots of lying going on.
Yep. And I would just throw into that too something that I learned big time when I was at State. Dana Priest's article, 2-part article in the Washington Post, sort of exposed this when she talked about 800,000+ top secret code word clearances. There are a lot of civilians, hundreds of thousands of civilians now embarked on this intelligence business, and sometimes doing as much damage as those inside.
Yeah.
Colonel, by the way, it seems that the case of Iran is much more serious for Donald Trump and his administration, because we see that Lindsey Graham, together with Tom Cotton, prepared a document that says no agreement with Iran unless they have to dismantle the enrichment of uranium totally, without any sort of exception or any sort of article being mentioning that they have to destroy everything, their capability to enrich uranium. Unless we're not gonna abide by, we're not gonna accept it. Do you think this panic comes from Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton? It's something comes from Netanyahu and Israel?
The latter, but probably with accord on the part of both Cotton and Graham. And let me say 2 things about that. I could be kind and say that that's his bad cop. That's Trump's bad cop, and he's got them doing that sort of thing. I won't be kind, and I'll say that look at what Marjorie Taylor Greene just said and affected with others in defeating that lousy piece of legislation that was unconstitutional as hell, and was coming out essentially to say, if I say you're an anti-Semite, I can jail you tomorrow morning without any due process whatsoever, and things like that. They're losing their own party. Congressman, senator by senator, they're losing their own party. I watched a budget hearing 2 days ago, and I was astounded at what some of the things the Republicans on that committee, I think it was the budget committee, because I didn't recognize a lot of the people, and it's big, so it probably was the House Budget Committee. And when AOC spoke up and talked about having 800 bases and China only had 1, I wanted to say, oh, no, they probably have about 8 to 10, depending on what you count a base. But you're right, we do have between 750 and I didn't hear that kind of word. And I know I didn't hear any Republicans accept it and say, yeah, that is a drain on the Treasury. So he's losing some Republicans. We're losing Republicans. The country is losing Republicans. Good, I say, and I'm a Republican, because of the stupidity of what we've been doing for the past 30 years. You just can't be that stupid consistently and sit in the Congress. I think we're going to see more of them deserting.
Yeah.
Larry, do you think that Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton are that much important to Donald Trump? Care about them?
Trump, I still don't understand why Trump plays golf with Lindsey Graham as much as he does.
Playing with the enemy.
Yeah. But Trump, Trump is still, as Colonel Wilkerson has frequently said, Trump always comes to a conclusion based upon the last person he talked to. So it's whoever, so that's why he's, can be wildly flip-flopping on issues and say one thing one day and then the exact opposite thing, 2 days later. But I think Trump's desire to secure a victory. I mean, look at how desperate he was yesterday, touting this big trade agreement with Great Britain. Apart from Scotch, I can't name another major import from Great Britain, that You know, uh, it's like they're not an economic powerhouse by any stretch, but by God, man, when Trump was talking about it, you would think it was like China's competitor. So, Trump's desperation to score some wins, some political wins, I think is real. And to that end, if he's got a chance that he can go out and say, hey, I have put an end forever to Iran's program to build nuclear weapons. I've accomplished it. He's not going to say, basically, I've gone back to JCPOA. I just haven't put a 10-year limit on it.
Yeah.
I think in that case, he would ignore Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton because, the danger Iran faces with this is they can make an agreement with Donald Trump, but if it's not going to go before the Senate as approval as a treaty, the next president can come in and trash it just like Trump trashed JCPOA.
In light of what Larry said about the volatility of Trump's character, I can't wait until he's been shown, probably by exit, videos of the Russian parade in Moscow.
Oh, yeah.
And the meetings with Xi Jinping and 29 other leaders, including Vietnam.
Yeah, I stayed up late to watch that thing. It was really something.
It was.
And I had the exact same thought. I said, boy, Trump, man, this is going to eat at him. Because no matter what he pulls off in June, he's going to have this big parade in June. It's not going to come anywhere close. I mean, just if nothing else, the magnificence of Red Square. I've been there and walked around it in wintertime and also in springtime. It's iconic. And the Washington Mall doesn't even begin to compare. And so Trump, oh yeah, Larry's right. This is going to eat at him.
I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't cancel his parade. You don't want to be shown up.
Since you've mentioned, Colonel, the case of Russia, and we know that they're trying to do a 30-day ceasefire with Russia, and which consequently later on leads on to some sort of permanent ceasefire and agreement between the two parties. Here is what Keith Kellogg said in that term, Colonel.
To what happened actually in the Baltics after World War II, where we never recognized the fact by de jure recognition of the Baltics that they went to then the Soviet Union. We said that over time things will change, and that's what we kind of tell the Ukrainians. The same thing when you look at what happened in Germany. The Germans always wanted a unified Germany after World War II. They didn't get it right away, but eventually they got it. So you tell the Ukrainians, look, this is one of those things that's going to be evolving over time. And if you do a ceasefire in place, the ground that you own, the ground that you fought for, that's your ground right now. What happens 5 or 10 years down the line is different. And you don't have to
basically freeze everything in place.
Right. And we've got that right now. The Ukrainians are willing to do a freeze in place, what I call a ceasefire in place. And then we'll for a period of time, they're willing to set up a demilitarized zone. What they basically said is, we'll back up 15 kilometers, you back up 15 kilometers to the Russians. So you got this 30-kilometer, 18-mile zone that you can actually observe. And you can actually say, okay, are there any intrusions?
Yeah.
I heard the rest of that yesterday, too, where he says the Germans will be there and the French will be there.
Yeah.
This guy's smoking some cheap stuff. I mean,
yeah.
And by the way, he should have been in the conversations with Helmut Kohl and H.W. Bush and Colin Powell and a number of other people, Jim Baker, when Kohl was very reluctant to reunify Germany. Very reluctant. Things were pretty good in Bonn. And $80 billion US was the estimate for just starting it. $80 billion. And he knew what Russia would think about a reunified Germany. Helmut Kohl had to be persuaded by Francois Mitterrand and John Major and George H.W. Bush most formidably. Not like everybody wanted Germany to be reunited.
Yeah. Larry, Keith Kellogg and what he has said about Ukraine, I don't see a teeny tiny possibility for that in the mind of Russians.
Yeah, there's two ways, no way and no way in hell. Okay. I mean, this, he lives at, I applaud Keith Kellogg for having a rich fantasy life because, he lives in this delusional world that, of course, the Ukrainians would love to have a ceasefire in place because Russia is moving all along the line of contact, at least up until they impose the 3-day ceasefire. Now, even though they put in place a 3-day ceasefire, still in those areas where Ukraine continues to attack, the Russians are fighting back. But the Russians have built up their forces, and I think right now, like at one spot in the Donbass, they're within like 4 or 5 kilometers of the border with Dnipropetrovsk, which is the next oblast to the west of Donetsk. And once the Ukrainians don't have any defenses built up in there. So basically, Russia can roll to the Dnieper River and take control of that as well. So they're going to start adding territory. So, yeah, it's 30-day ceasefire. The Russians are not going to accept a ceasefire. They've made that very clear. And it all boils down to, again, we talked about it earlier, the failure of people to put themselves in the Russian shoes and understand why they think like they think, why they see the world as they do. Just let me give you one simple statistic. In World War II, the Russians, 20% of the Russian people died in that war. 20%, 1 out of every 5. In the United States, in terms of a number of our people that died in the war in Europe, North Africa, and Italy, 0.1%. That's why we don't remember victory in Europe. We didn't pay a price at all. And we've been inundated with the Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, the greatest generation, man. Yeah, and yes, the guys that fought, I honor their service. But let's not pretend that losing 0.1% of our population corresponds to 1 in every 5 dying. That's why the Russians remember. And they see the world through that lens. And the failure on our side to understand that, because every damn war we've been in since then, we don't pay a price in blood. Yeah, we lose 50,000 in Korea, 58,000 in Vietnam, but that's stretched out over 15 years. Now, for the families who lost a loved one, yes, it's devastating. They remember. But the bulk of the population doesn't. All we do is end up feeding these military industrial corporations that make more money, get wealthier over it, and, we can pay some disability payments. I mean, sorry to be that cynical about it, but that's the fundamental problem with us. We simply do not understand and appreciate. And that's why the Russians, they're not going to budge.
Carl.
Ask Napoleon.
Yeah.
Here is what J.D. Vance said. He thinks that Russia is asking for too much.
And I have criticized the full-scale invasion, but you have to try to understand where the other side is coming from to end the conflict. And I think that's what President Trump has been very deliberate about, is actually forcing the Russians to say, here is what we would like in order to end the conflict. And again, you don't have to agree with it. You can think that the request is too significant, and certainly the first peace offer that the Russians put on the table, our reaction to it was, you're asking for too much, but this is how negotiations unfold. And I wouldn't say, I'm not yet that pessimistic on this, I wouldn't say that the Russians are uninterested in bringing this thing to a resolution. What I would say is right now, the Russians are asking for a certain set of requirements, a certain set of concessions in order to end the conflict. We think they're asking for too much, okay?
What's too much, in your opinion, Carl?
Well, first of all, I disagree with that, quote, full-scale invasion comment. Had Russia wanted to mount a special military operation that was a full-scale invasion in the terms that J.D. Vance meant there, it would have been quite a different affair, I think. They might have still had some initial problems, but it had been quite a different affair. I think he's basically speaking the truth with one exception, and it is a glaring exception. And that is that Putin has absolutely no reason to concede anything that he wants. None whatsoever.
Yeah.
And when you look at who started this war, who the war was really between, Washington and Moscow and NATO and Moscow, the proxy relationship Ukraine assumed in that, regardless of the blood she shed, and that's a crime for us, not a crime for Russia. And regardless of the fact that he crossed borders and, violated the UN Charter and all that kind of, what did we do in 2003? I'm sorry very much. Kofi Annan said that was an illegal war, and he was right. So, I mean, he didn't do anything that was that egregious. He just did something to protect, in an existential way, he believes, and I think he's right, what might have been a real threat to Moscow and to Russia and the CSTO. So, JD, no matter what you say to gain posture in the negotiations, you're going to have to, if you want this to end on some kind of reasonable basis, you're going to have to concede almost everything, if not everything, that Putin wants. So that's the reality of it. Now, he's not going to say that because he wants to be president when Trump is gone. And he knows he's got to run against Rubio. And they're both getting ready to, mount their campaigns, as it were. That is if Trump surrenders. But, It was a reasonable comment for him to make as a part of the negotiations, but I got to give him credit for that. But on the other hand, it shows, and they're not willing to admit how much of this that they could admit politically, I think, and get away with it, because the American people, 62% now, almost of all stripes, are for this war shutting down. He could probably get away with more, like admitting to some of the complicity that I guess Trump doesn't want him to, because he had complicity in it too from 2016 to 2020.
Yep.
So there's no one with no guilt on them here. None. On our side, there's no one with no guilt.
Larry, do you see Donald Trump being able to change the rhetoric if he meets with Vladimir Putin, because they're talking about they're going to have a meeting in the near future? Is that going to change the tone on the part of the United States?
Yeah, I think it will. I mean, Trump's bombast in public. He's a completely different guy in private, and I have that from someone that's had several meetings with him over the course of the last year and a half. Completely different personality. Not given to this kind of bombast. Much kinder, actually. The problem we have in the United States, and it's not just confined to Trump, it's confined to our entire political class, our media, our educational institutions. We're like an Alzheimer's patient. We have no memory of how we got to where we are. And in contrast, go back to, let's call it the birth of Vladimir Putin. In 1999 was really the pivotal year that has shaped, I think, what Putin is today. Because on March 12th of that year, Bill Clinton brought in Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary into NATO, expanded it to the east, something that the Russians have been told we wouldn't do. 2 weeks later, NATO invades Serbia. And Serbia at the time was seen as an ally of Russia. And in fact, the United States took some actions to prevent the Russians from providing any resupply and support to the Serbians. Then in August 7th, and during this entire period, Yeltsin's president, August 7th, the Second Chechen War starts. You got an invasion of radical jihadists, Sunni extremists. I guarantee you they were funded by the CIA. Yeah. CIA had a hand in this invasion. So this was part of a Western plan. They're really in the process of humiliating Russia. 2 days after that invasion, on August 9th, Boris Yeltsin names Vladimir Putin as prime minister. And then it's 4 months later that Yeltsin just all of a sudden resigns and Putin becomes president. So right at his birth, at that outset, he understands Russia is under attack by NATO on several fronts. It's under economic attack because of the oligarchs that they were doing, raping Russia at the time. And it was facing this radical Islamic insurgency that was killing, it literally killed thousands of Russians. And so he came out of that, and somehow, I think it's almost miraculous what he's done in 26 years to completely turn that country around, to rebuild the armed forces. And even though he had made repeated attempts to try to placate NATO, to join NATO, to work in peace and harmony with the West, and has consistently faced intelligence operations designed to destroy Russia up until even the start of that special military operation. That's what Trump and that's what we don't get on this side. We think that we like to create this narrative that, Vladimir Putin wants to recreate the Soviet Empire. I mean, if I hear that crap one more time, if I'm with somebody that says that, I'll punch him in the face, just to wake them up. That is so stupid. Remember, we pushed building NATO at the time where the Russian army shrank from 3.5 million to 1.3 million over a 20-year period. I mean, if it was going the other way, yeah, I'd say you could make the case we got to build up NATO, but it was just the opposite. So, sorry, this is your fault, Nimi. You got me on this rant. I blame you.
I got to say, my educated guess is Donald Trump knows none of that.
Yeah, none.
He knows none of that. So he's at a disadvantage going into any kind of negotiation. Were I Putin, and I was looking out of Moscow towards Western Europe and Eastern Europe and across the Atlantic, I would never deal with us again because we lie, cheat, and steal, and he has prima facie evidence of all of those things, and it's a threat to him.
Yeah.
We've forced him in the other direction.
Colonel, do you find it the last chance between the United States and Russia to get along with each other? Because Putin, as Larry pointed out, for more than 2 decades was trying to make some sort of arrangement between the United States and Russia to get along with the West, to be part of the West, which it means Russia was rejected to be in that position. Do you see this sort of attempt to achieve something in Ukraine would be one of the final chances to get there?
Well, what I've been saying is this inexorable movement of power that's shifting from the West back to the East where it came from 3,000 years ago is you can't do anything about it. It's happening. And that the meetings around Putin in Moscow have demonstrated that conclusively. It's just going to grow in that regard. The global South, I don't know why they call it the global South. It's 3/4 of the world that's gathering to the banners of China and Russia. In that discussion, in my paper that I wrote on that, I said Russia is in both worlds, always has been, and has always found that a very difficult position, but has repeatedly, since Catherine the Great anyway, leaned more towards and tried to get into Europe and been rebuffed every time. This latest time is us and the leaders in Europe right now. Russia has to make a decision. I think Putin is going to make that decision. He is going the other way.
Yeah, fully agree. They're looking, this relationship with China is not superficial. It is profound. It's deep. And despite the cultural differences, the language differences, I think both Putin and Xi have had an awakening over the course of the last 3 years to realize how not only capricious but dangerous the United States is. That it comes bearing flowers and candy, but it's carrying a gun, and all we're doing is trying to lull you into into submission, and then we can take advantage of you. That's been the Western model, and Putin, I firmly believe that Putin understands that. And that's why, both Russia and China now represent such a threat to to the United States and its position as, its pretend position as the world leader, because we're no longer leading anything, because we've been so guilty of abusing so many other countries and taking advantage of them, that we haven't built up relationships where people love us and welcome our friendship. Because, man, our friendship, it comes with a lot of baggage, and there are a lot of codicils attached to our agreements that, basically, hey, we get.
It seems that the internet connection. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're back there.
Yeah, I'm back. We're all back here. Yeah, so it's just, the United States is we've worn out our welcome, and we don't realize it yet. But the world is changing, as Colonel Wilkerson correctly pointed out. It is, when I was at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum a year ago, 38 other countries were there, but it was the place was packed.
That is a very good metaphor that Larry used there. When the United States comes in with that gun under the cake, as it were.
Yeah.
And this is a sad commentary. That gun is liberal democracy. That's what we've done to liberal democracy, using it as a gun to punish people, to have orange revolutions from Tbilisi to you name it. It no longer has a positive patina to it, to much of the world. Liberal democracy is anathema because it isn't liberal democracy. It's the United States of America and its empire.
Yeah, and one of the other things is this whole narrative, and, Colonel Wilkerson and I are both, we're products of the Cold War. I mean, we grew up in the 50s and 60s. And I posed a sort of a question to the American people. I said, let's reverse the roles. Let's assume that as a result of World War II, the Germans killed 20% of our people. And then at the end of that war, the Russians, who were our ostensible allies, turned around and basically rescued senior German officers and scientists, people that had been involved in killing us, and used them as well as to build intelligence organizations to collect information on us. Do you think we'd react in a negative way towards Russia? Bet your ass we would. Well, that's exactly what we did to Russia. And so we want to pretend that this communists, they were taking over the world. It was all a lie. And we created this hostility with Russia instead of welcoming them and recognizing from the outset what they sacrificed. The entire history of the last really 80 years could have been so different. And it wasn't the Russians that caused that. It was us.
I don't normally do the one-man theory of history, but if I did, I'd point a guilty finger at Allen Dulles for all of that.
Yeah.
Because he was central to it. And fundamentally, he did it for money.
If Colonel, if they fail to achieve something, a Ukrainian settlement, how is that going to influence? We know that today is a very important day for Russians, for everybody on the planet, in my opinion. And Xi Jinping is there, Lula is there, and the global South, the global majority is there. And how do you see the behavior of the global South and the reaction coming out of if Donald Trump and his administration finally is not able to get something in Ukraine, or I'm talking about a Ukrainian settlement? How is that going to influence the situation in the Middle East and with Taiwan?
In so many words and simply, it is going to tell them that they are right to be worried and that they're in the right place and that if they stay in that place and solidify that place, the empire will go away. Or the empire will, and this is my great fear, be so pressed existentially, it will think and believe, and probably so, that we'll start something big and we'll use nuclear weapons. And the place where that is looming large right now and has a confidant in the process is Taipei. Because we've got a president there again, like Chen Shui-bian was during my administration at the State Department, who wants to be independent. He's not going to go out and be stupid enough to, as CSB did, almost declare a vote for independence. Red line with Beijing, big red line. But he's doing things right now every day that put China on the qui vive for a military operation against Taiwan. And there's no way we're going to win that. So that could be the ultimate denouement of what we're doing right now in our stupidity. I hope not, but that really worries me.
Larry, how about you? About China and Taiwan?
Well, again, we've manufactured China as an enemy, which is, the irony here is 53 years ago now, Nixon goes to China to open it up. And the purpose, it was nefarious. We wanted to use China as a wedge against Russia.
Yeah.
We wanted to weaken the Soviet Union at the time. Okay, and so as a result of that, we end up building up China economically. And then the Chinese, not being stupid people, they find a variety of ways to make money. They do, they've engaged in what I call some nefarious capitalist activity. Good God. The United States has done the same. We had a whole generation of what they called robber barons. Okay, so let's not pretend that we're some sort of innocents in this process. And so we actually build up and help China become what China is. And now that we've enabled them, we want to destroy them. We've made them now our fixation. Oh God, we got to stop China. China's taken over the world. They're in Panama. We got to stop. They've been in friggin' Panama for 30 years. And they were there during Trump's first administration too. He didn't say a thing about it then. This is all a put on. The China, we now need the China as an enemy to justify $1 trillion defense budget. Because we can't, if we cut that defense budget, the economy of the United States is going to collapse. It's being artificially kept inflated or kept alive because of our endless wars. That's the sad truth about this.
Colonel, just to wrap up this session, the conflict between India and Pakistan, it doesn't seem to be that much important for the mainstream media. They're not talking that much about it, but it's so much sensitive and important when you consider that both countries possess the nuclear bombs, and it can happen any moment by some decision in Pakistan or in India. Do you think that the international community is doing whatever is at their disposal to do in the terms of the conflict that is happening there?
I know China and Russia are doing things. I hope we're doing things. I don't see it in the news, but I hope we're doing things like we did in 2002. As I recall, they weren't very much in the news at that time until Powell's trip was sort of exposed when we went to lecture both Islamabad and Delhi on escalation theory and so forth. But I watched that. I thought you were going to play that video. I watched that Indian Air Force general yesterday, and I was reminded of both Islamabad and Delhi when he finished his first peroration, which essentially said, as Air Force generals are wont to do, Nima, that we are going to, he said, Pakistan is little country, little country, little country. India, big, big country. We drop 100 bombs on Pakistan, disappear. They drop bombs on us if they can get them out and fired, insinuating a first strike. We want, like Mao Zedong said, I'll destroy Los Angeles and Houston and New York, and you'll destroy a couple of cities, and I'll still have 800 million people left. So, that's my deterrence. I will destroy you if you shoot one at me. I don't need many to do that. This is really a cavalier attitude. So I have to assume one of two things. This is the same way it was in 2002, maybe with a little bit of experience behind them now. And that guy is just out there for the Delhi government, who are never going to turn him loose to do what he was insinuating Delhi was going to do. That is fire 100 nuclear weapons in Pakistan and eliminate the threat just like that. And not take much themselves because they wouldn't be able to fire much. Oh, but if they were, it wouldn't hurt India that much because they're vast and deep. These are stupid words, unless that's what they are. And even then they're stupid. The civilians authorized him to say that just to get the, pucker factor up. If they are genuine words and the civilians have unleashed him, we got a serious crisis.
The other aspect to this, and I have to say thanks to the Pakistani Defense Minister Asif. I could have made a case, it would have been conjecture, that the United States has been playing a critical role, along with British intelligence, in funding, stirring up radical Sunni terrorist activity in Pakistan. But people said, well, where's your proof, Johnson? And I said, well, I don't have a document. I just, knowing how the system works, that would be my conclusion. Well, now I don't have to be conjecturing anymore, because the defense minister came out the other day, and initially he said, well, look, this terrorist attack in the Kashmir, this was staged.
I have my own concerns about that because I know how plugged into the ISI the CIA is. And I know how
there are.
Because Larry, you said they were staying, and then you cut. Can you hear us, Larry?
Example. This is an example where we're saying the wrong thing, and NSA is going, hey, we can't have that. But what it's, I really think that the Western intelligence was behind this initially in order to do two things. One, to create further friction between India and China, as well as to weaken and destroy BRICS. I think that's part of what was behind all of this. And as Colonel Wilkerson correctly noted, this idiot Air Force general in India has fallen into the trap.
Yeah.
And again, blue suitor, blue suitor. Pakistan, little country, we destroy it. We big country, we take lots of hits.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Colonel and Larry, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Always enjoyable.
Yep. Thanks, Nima. Watch out down there in Brazil. You're next.
Hope so.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.